Hey everybody, so it's been a little while since I posted a video. I've been kind of busy recently, but I've been doing a little project on the side. I haven't really been recording too much, but I'm going to give you a bit of demonstration. I actually have been trying to find a new place to kind of display my Indiana Jones collection. And now with the 3D printer, I've been thinking about actually molding some Mayan temple, pieces kind of thing, or at least a base. So I actually got to this point where I played around on my SketchUp and did some, creation pieces, printed them out. And this is kind of like the result where I'm at right now, where I've actually got an entire base, kind of like a stone rocky floor, with several kind of Mayan sculpts that I actually have done, and glued it all onto a piece of wood, and this is going to sit on a specific place outside in the front there. My next stage actually is that I do want to use a Dremel and actually soften some of the edges of my architectural sculpts, and then once I've done that, I'm going to actually base paint it and put a few layers of paint on it, and hopefully that'll be kind of like the end of it. It'll go out there. I'll get the chance to move some Indiana Jones stuff into a display area. So yeah, I got myself a small battery operated Dremel, and I'm just gonna soften the edges here. So I'm gonna get myself a little face mask. There is a lot of little fine dust coming up from this, a bit too much in my room here, so I'll be getting that. Also, with using files, I can actually go in here and soften some of these edges a little bit. Now that I've sanded back enough of it just to soften the edges a little bit, I'm going to go back in, or I'm going to go in and actually do some painting. So we've got a couple of base paints I'm going to work with first. I'm going to go in with almost like an immediate scumble, which is basically two different colors going in and kind of splotching them around one and the other. I pick this ochre color here, and then I've got this kind of like creamy base here. And then somewhere in between I'm going to find a good neutral color to kind of do a wash and create a shadow wash over it. And I'm going to make sure I get all into these little nooks and crannies. I'm going to go in with the other one and kind of blend it a little bit on the side. I'm going to come up with more of a ochre color kind of mix kind of thing. It's probably going to need more than one layer, because it seems like, because I've got no base on top of the resin print, I'm gonna go back in and give it a nice kind of solid secondary layer a bit later, once this dries. I ended up by playing around. I actually poured in some of my own design stuff. I looked online for some research with the Mayan temple kind of look and feel, and I figured that was a good place to start for an Indiana Jones style of display base, just to have all this Mayan architectural, seems right for the character that I want to display everything on. So I ended up by going through creating the design. I ended up by going into SketchUp, made the base design, and then ended up by pulling up the imagery and pulling into third dimension from there. I do have a tablet that allows me to draw, which allows me to go into SketchUp and actually physically draw all my squirrely shapes. They're much easier to get, more organic than they are if I do it without that. So using the tablet, I created all my shapes and then pulled them up into the third dimension. And then I basically used epoxy resin to glue the pieces onto the piece of plywood here. It was really, at the end of the day, it's just plastic going straight onto wood. So it's a really pretty simple mix. And you can see with these two tones here, I'm gaining a kind of a bit of a scumbly mix between the ochre and the creamy base. In this case, I'm going to keep it on the lighter tone because it allows me to both do highlights and shadows when I do them in separately later. I'm going to do it like everything else. I'm going to do painting with a series of layers, creating multi-layers of paint to dry, let it set, come back in, paint the next layer to build up your final look and texture on everything that you want to be for the final result. And one of the advantages of doing the 3D printing and making my molds, I mass produced a couple of different shapes multiple times between the base of the actual solid rock flat pieces to the detail molding of all the hieroglyphs that are used in the Mayan stuff. And I got the chance to do a couple of different versions. Spent a bit of time, took me a little bit more time than I wanted to on the computer to get the Mayan scrolly bits. They definitely were involved, but having them means that if I want to extend on this, I can do it later. And if I did this the other way, where I had to build them all by scratch, I'm sure the blocky parts would have been pretty simple. But to carve each individual Mayan thing by themselves would have taken me way longer to do. It just wouldn't have been as accurate. The cool thing about doing them on the computer is I can make it really large, do all the detail, and then when I shrink them down to this size, they actually kind of maintain all of their imagery and all their shape and everything like that. That the resin printer allows me to keep. So you can see here I've got a base over the top of the whole thing. I probably will let it dry, but I do have to go back in and do a second layer just to help get a surface, over the surface area there. So that's it there, that's the base. I'll be back when I actually have this dry and I'll do a second layer. Okay, so this is dry and I've got my two different layers. I'm going to go back in first. I'm going to do the brown over the top of the yellow ochre. So I want this to be a little bit more brownish kind of color, and then the gray is going to go more of kind of just a black dark shadow wash, as in the image there. In the image you can see there's two different colors that are representing both parts of the Mayan temple, and I just want to have this separation, as I was saying earlier. So what I'm going to do is, or what I've done here is I've mixed up a dark brown wash, water, probably about 60-70% water, actually probably more like 80% water there. So it drops at a milky consistency. I've got a cup of water here. I've got a small bowl that I can mix the water in. And what I want to do here is I just want to go in. I've got a couple of different small brushes. The small one here is going to be so I can just get into the nooks and crannies of all of the textures I've got there. And then the other one allows me just to go over the top with a bit of water on it and kind of just bleed it in there a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of paper towel. I'm just going to wipe off some of the excess off the top here, and you'll start to see that the darker shadows kind of fall into all the nooks and crannies and create kind of a shadow effect to it. I'm eventually going to go over and do another highlight as well, and you'll see that highlight will help enhance and pop everything forward. So I'm not worried about it covering too evenly at this point in time, as long as I've got these little dark areas that I actually can stay dark and can stay buried in the crevices there. The trick is also not to let the watered down washes dry out too quickly. So I want to make sure I'm only doing small sections at a time when I go over the top and wash it out, that I'm really just getting rid of wet, watered down paint rather than letting it dry out too quickly. And again, you can see here all of the highlights stay lighter, all the shadows fall to the dark crevices there. And now that I've finished off the outside there, it got a little messy on the inside, but that's okay. I'm gonna now go in with the black, and I'm gonna use the black inside these areas here. And same thing, I'm gonna go over the top, let it fall into all the cracks in the ground. And eventually I'm going to go over with a lighter highlight. This is a very weak black, so I'm going to add a bit more black back into my water here. Give it a bit more strength. Now this is a kind of a light dark wash. I'm going to also go back in with a heavier dark wash and kind of really pinpoint some of these cracks. I'm going to go in with a fine brush, and then that way some of those cracks will really stay and stick. You can see here, this is the first wash that I've put over the top. It's picking up all the shadows. A dark wash for the black and the gray, a brown wash for the yellow ochre colors. Right now it's extraordinarily dark, and I will be playing back into it with the highlights, but that's the next stage. I need to wait this out to dry, and then I am going to add to the next level. One of the things I want to do before I actually go into doing the highlights and stuff, so I'd actually want to put in a slight spackle texture over everything. The technique's normally called spattering. And what I'm doing is, same thing, I've got a cup of watered down light color, I'm going to have a cup of watered down dark color. I'm going to dip my paintbrush into it. I'm going to get a whole lot of the excess out. I don't want this to be very runny at all. And then I'm going to get a small stick, and I'm very lightly just going to tap over the stick. And you can see there, I'm adding a slight speckle over everything. It gives it like little textures within the stone kind of vibes. I want to go over both my brown and my black colors with that. I do want to come in from the side and try to hit the edges. Make sure you've got plenty of room around you, because you can actually make quite the mess. And now that I've done the light color, I'm going to go back in, let it dry, and then do the dark color afterwards. I'm going to go back in, same thing with the black, very lightly tap over the top. You can see a very simple technique where you're just adding a bit of a spatter, adds a very nice grain texture over the top of the stonework, and it's really gonna actually enhance it all. And basically it also is nice to get this in before you start doing your highlights and any additional shadows, just because that way it's kind of buried there underneath everything. But yeah, simple, kind of like nearly white, a little off white, and washed, watered down, plus black watered down. It's a very nice spatter texture to create stone and rock. The next stage is going to be highlights, and I'm just going to use the lighter color, and I'm going to come back over the top and very lightly just dry brush It's too heavy. Make sure I get as much off the brush as possible. So it doesn't need to be thick, it just needs to be very, very light. But a dry brush over the top, and it picks up on the highlights. Again, I'm using a different type of brush. This one's allowing me with a nice flat surface so it can drag easily over the top of the textures. And this will help lighten down some of my color here. You can still see through it all, so you can see some of those little speckles and the dots that I've been doing coming through underneath it all, so it starts to have that kind of very old, used feel to the stone. There's a few more washes I'm going to do over the top of this. Some texture washes that give some of these stones different shades. And then some final shadow washes, deep shadow washes, just for lines like cracks and stuff like that I want to put in there. I'm finding that the larger brushes are easier, but I want to go along the edge. Just get the edges here. Coming back over it, I went a little too heavy on that little brush there, unfortunately, in places, but I've got another layer added on top with a highlight, and what I plan to do next now is go and do all my really deep shadow washes, and that's what really starts to bring it forward. Actually, I've got one other series of washes. I also want to have a bit of ochre colors coming in and separating some of these, so that right now all the squares are feeling too much the same as each other. I want to make sure some squares are a little darker, some stay a little lighter, some are in, you know, slight yellowy colors and stuff like that. So that's next. I do want to go back in. Some of these I want to change the color of the actual tile, as they actually, you know, they want a little bit more texture and color in there. So I'm going to go back in with a wash. It's going to go over the top of it all. And I'll continue that wash under the side as well, just to get a couple of tiles with a very different little vibe going on there. And this is still not my final shadows and highlights, but it's a defining part of making some of these tiles be a bit more defined kind of thing. I'll go back over some of the really heavy ones here. So now I start forming a bit of a random tile kind of thing going on there. I'm also going to go back in, and some of the ones that I've not hitting, just going to kind of highlight some of the cracks, since I could actually get in there and do some of that little bit of work. I'm going to bring back a little bit of the dark wash into some of these little areas, because I feel like we want to get these weird little subtle references to pop forward a bit more. You see it's starting to form a bit of breakup over each of the stones. We still have a little bit more shadows I want to put in there, and a couple of little touches of highlight once again over the top of everything. But it's starting to form exactly what I want it to do, which is create this very broken down textural look and vibe to a very Mayan design. Getting close to finishing now. The final stages is a final dark shadow, which I've got a much darker shadow wash in there. I'm just really just going in to enhance corners and a couple of little areas in here, just to help darken and provide some stronger lines for all that. So I'm going to go back in very slowly, add these in first. This one I've just got a much finer brush, just because I want to be very delicate in between these areas here. And same little brush again, just going through with the light color. I'm just going to do a few little highlights, like much smaller ones this time, that are going to help. It just adds a little bit of breakup, which helps be a bit more realistic on something of this scale. And that's it, the final version of the Mayan kind of landing. I'm going to display Indiana Jones's hat and a few other things. That's going to go in an area on the shelf in the front room. There you have it, final result. I'm going to let it dry for a few more minutes, but then I'm going to start putting on some of my Indiana Jones display stuff, which includes an action figure and the hat and a few other bits and pieces.